Welcome in on a Monday, everybody. I'm Reed Cowan. So the week in the Windy City brings stories off of these monitors from the Democratic National Convention. Plus, the DNC bringing protesters as the race to find a ceasefire in Gaza and perhaps some solutions there reaches a potential finish line. This is CBS News 24/7 on a Monday. Let's go. Right off the top, our video monitors take us to Elizabethtown, Kentucky. It's about 45 miles outside of Louisville. At this very moment, police are locked in a standoff situation with a suspected shooter. That man held up is thought to have some connection to a shooting at a courthouse that happened earlier this morning. So far, here's what we know. 3 people hit by gunfire, 1 person killed, and victims are apparently all related, according to police. The suspect's name, Christopher Elder. So police say this shooting was a targeted situation. There's no danger in that area to anybody else. But listen right here as police describe how a safety camera system that they call Flock helped quickly locate their man.
We put the vehicles in Flock immediately, and we were able to determine the vehicle itself, which is one of the benefits of Flock. As we've said many times, instead of telling you that it's and I'm just throwing it out there, a 1986 Toyota Camry, we can show you the Toyota Camry or the Nissan, whatever that make and model is. This particular suspect vehicle, he had 2. We confirmed that one of the vehicles was in maintenance right now at a local repair shop, and this vehicle that he was in during the commission of this crime this morning had unique factors with spray paint down the side. So we searched Flock, we found that, and we were able to put that out regionally.
And in putting that out, that also meant the shooting forced schools in the area to go on a soft lockdown. But again, a police standoff after a triple shooting at a Kentucky courthouse. We'll keep watching this situation, and as soon as news happens, we'll bring it to you live right here on the stream. Our live monitors now take us to Philadelphia, where Senator J.D. Vance is at this very moment speaking right now. The message, your money and energy. This is video right now inside live a manufacturing company. You're going to listen to what he has a little bit later in this broadcast. But meanwhile, former President Donald Trump, he is also on the campaign trail, this time in Pennsylvania. Right now, he's about 100 miles outside of Philadelphia in the town of York. We'll take you live there during our next half hour. Candidate for President Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz were in Pennsylvania over the weekend. They now look to the Democratic National Convention, where they will formally accept their party's nomination for the presidency. Our live monitors right now showing us this look from Chicago inside on day 1 of the DNC already in process. You can actually see here the vice president and the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff. They are already in Chicago, spotted there, arriving at O'Hare International Airport. CBS News political director Finn Gomez live on the stream with us today. Finn, a lot of attention on what President Biden will have to say tonight at the DNC. Some people wondering if this will be a swan song or if he'll rise to the occasion to make it a fight song.
That's a great question, Reed. And yes, you know, it's interesting to think just a little over a month ago, Reed, this week was supposed to be a victory lap for President Biden. He was securing the nomination and making the second run, his reelection bid for the White House. Instead, a month now since he dropped out of the race, now it's going to be Vice President Harris who's going to be officially and formally securing that nomination this week instead. So, yeah, his speech, we're told, will be focused primarily. It's going to be paying a tribute not only to his career, but also to essentially what he's accomplished, what Democrats and what the president himself says they have accomplished, these big legislative accomplishments during his the last 4 years. And so it's going to be that, but it is an interesting confluence of events, Reed, from what we expected just a little over a month ago to what the reality is now, where Harris is competing now with former President Donald Trump, with just 78 days to go until the November 5th election. Reed.
Who else is on stage with President Biden tonight? What are some of the other big names?
Some of the other big names, Reed, are not only is going to be former Secretary of State Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and of course, who was the 26th nominee for the Democratic Party. I was there during that convention, and I was also there at the Javits Center on election night in 2016. And I think the expectation is, and what we're hearing from Democrats close to Clinton and to the DNC planning is that, it's also like a continuation of like where they see the trajectory of this going. By nominating the first woman of color to the ticket, you have this potential to now have a historic moment again in just 78 days from now, where Harris could become the next president. So, from where she was, well, from where Hillary Clinton was in 2016 to the disappointing finish for Democrats during that 2016 election, now it's jumping to present day, where they could actually finally break that glass ceiling, political glass ceiling, if you will. And that's what I'm being told by Democrats. It's really that continuation, that legacy also from Clinton to Harris.
We remember Hillary Clinton on the stage at the DNC and the graphics that showed the virtual representation of that glass ceiling. So no doubt that will be a theme. Political Director Finn Gomez, thank you so much. Another big headline out of Chicago this week, protests about the Biden administration's support for Israel in its war with Hamas. So this means security teams inside and outside the convention are eagle-eyed for safety. Here's Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson talking about safety, not only for delegates, but for everybody inside the DNC.
Our police superintendent has worked diligently, not just with our local police department, but with local departments, as well as the Secret Service and federal agencies for the last several months. And that collaborative approach is truly the spirit of who we are in this city. But we also could not have done this without the hard work of the everyday Chicagoans, led by my Chief Operations Officer, John Robertson, that has ensured that every single city department and sister agency came together to respond to this moment. The city of Chicago is really good at things like this. It's the reason why we have hosted more national and political conventions than anywhere else in America. There's a reason why Time Out magazine rated us #1 as it relates to conventions. And so the people on the front line who continue to work, to our OMC, to our firefighters, our EMTs, our Chicago police officers, and again, our streets and sanitation, I can name a bunch of everyday Chicagoans, transit, CTA, bus operators, train operators, who've all come together to respond to this moment. And we are ready. We are ready.
You hear the mayor there saying this moment. Roxana Saberi is live in Chicago. Roxana, it looks like you are outside where protesters are gathering. Talk to us about the security, because we do know protesters plan to have a very large voice in the backdrop.
Yeah, as you heard the superintendent there saying that his forces are ready. We've seen some police presence here, mostly on bicycles, and there is also some plainclothes police presence here. The protesters have been gathering here. The crowds have been growing. I'd say there are a couple thousand here so far. Organizers are expecting a few thousand to march today in these rallies, which are supposed to be the largest of this week. They've been setting out posters like these that say, "End U.S. aid to Israel." We've also seen a lot of Palestinian flags and other signs here. The main message that protesters have is to end the war in Gaza, but there are people out here for other causes as well. We've spoken to protesters who have traveled here to Chicago from places like Los Angeles and Portland, here to speak about migrant rights, labor rights, and abortion rights. The protests, the speeches are going to start here pretty soon, and then the march is set to kick off from here in Union Park down to United Center, which is that way, which is where the delegates are going to be meeting every evening this week. And then the march is going to circle back over here. The protest organizers had wanted a longer march route, about 2.5 miles. In the end, they were given 1. A judge last week said it should get them close enough to the United Center to be seen and heard by delegates. In a concession, though, to the protesters, organizers say they were able to receive permission from the city last night to set up their own sound system and stage. You can hear the sound system behind me, which they hope will amplify their message here today. Reed?
Roxana Saberi, thank you so much for that live picture of life on the outside of that convention center. Thank you very, very much. So while you watch the Biden administration tee up Kamala Harris for president, behind the scenes, the administration working for a ceasefire in Gaza. We understand right now that Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel. He's working to strike that deal between Hamas and Israel. fact, he met with Israel's prime minister today. The Secretary of State just spoke moments ago. We want to let you listen in on that.
This is now my 9th trip to the region since October 7th. And President Biden asked me to come back on this trip with two main goals in mind. The first is to reaffirm the commitment of the United States to Israel's security. That's a commitment that we put into practice virtually every day since October 7th, including when Israel was attacked directly by Iran back in April. In recent weeks, given the heightened tensions, we have deployed additional assets to the region. The purpose of the deployment of these assets is not to provoke aggression, but rather to deter it, to make sure that it doesn't happen. But also to make clear that if it does, we are fully prepared to defend Israel. We've coupled this effort with an intense diplomatic campaign, virtually a global diplomatic campaign, working with countries around the world to send the message strongly to every concerned party not to take any steps that would escalate tensions, that would risk provoking a wider conflict. And this, too, has been something we've been working on from day one, since October 7th. It's been one of our primary objectives, to prevent the conflict from escalating, from spreading to other places. And so this coupling of our military commitments, our security commitments, with an intense diplomatic campaign is something that I'm pursuing on this trip, again, with the intent of making sure that we deter further conflict, but that we're also clearly prepared to defend against it if it comes. But what's most crucial now is that everyone refrain from taking any actions that could fuel further conflict, escalate tensions, and result in the spreading of violence and conflict. The second purpose was to further the intense efforts we're engaged in across our government to bring an agreement for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages across the finish line. That is the single best way, obviously, to get hostages home, to get an enduring ceasefire that also reflects Israel's security interests, to relieve the terrible daily suffering of Gazans, men, women, and children, desperate for food to eat, for shelter, and for staying out of harm's way. Back in May, President Biden put before the world a detailed proposed agreement on a ceasefire and the release of hostages. And the entire world rallied behind it. Country after country came out in support of that agreement. The United Nations Security Council voted 14-0 in support of the agreement, and the heart of it is incorporated into a UN Security Council resolution. Just last week, the President put forward a proposal with Qatar and with Egypt to try to bridge the gaps that remain between the parties so that we could get agreement to what the President put out there a couple of months ago. In a very constructive meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu today, he confirmed to me that Israel accepts the bridging proposal, that he supports it. It's now incumbent on Hamas to do the same. And then the parties, with the help of the mediators, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, have to come together and complete the process of reaching clear understandings about how they'll implement the commitments that they've made under this agreement. But the next important step is for Hamas to say yes, and then in the coming days for all of the expert negotiators to get together to work on clear understandings on implementing the agreement. These are still complex issues, and they're going to require hard decisions by the leaders. Ultimately, it comes down to those decisions, but there is, I think, a real sense of urgency here across the region on the need to get this over the finish line and to do it as soon as possible. The United States is deeply committed to getting this job done, to getting it done now. From here, I'm going on to Egypt and Qatar. And these are our two critical partners in this effort to get the ceasefire agreement over the finish line, to get the hostages home, to put everyone on a better path to lasting peace and security. And so I look forward to consulting with President Sisi, with the Emir, Sheikh Tamim, with other critical colleagues in both countries on the immediate steps ahead, and in particular, what needs to be done to ensure that Hamas comes along, agrees to the bridging proposal, and that everyone then works on finalizing a clear understanding of their commitments to implement the agreement. That's where we are, and again, I just say that for us, for President Biden, there's a deep sense of urgency in getting this done. And I also hear that throughout this country as well as throughout the region. It's the single best way not only to get the hostages home, to ease the suffering of people in Gaza, it's also the best way to make sure that conflict doesn't spread, that we don't see escalation, that we can actually diffuse some of the pressure points that we see throughout the region, and then open prospects for trying to build a more enduring peace and security for everyone throughout the Middle East. Happy to take some questions.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken right there speaking at the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem right now. And of course, the big question, if Hamas says yes to a ceasefire deal, the world watches and waits, not the least of which the protesters who are outside the DNC right now protesting U.S. help and response to back up Israel in their war against Hamas. Hey, BBC News correspondent Weira Davis is live right now on the stream, top of mind, and you heard the Secretary of State say that Hamas has to say yes, but Hamas is saying that the Prime Minister of Israel is doing a lot to prolong this war. Where do you think Hamas is at this hour?
It's a really good question because no one in the region, I think, can doubt Antony Blinken's commitment to try and find a resolution here, a peace deal that would lead also to the release of the hostages. But thus far, he's come up against pretty big brick walls on both sides. But Blinken's emphasis has been that this is very much the last chance saloon. So Benjamin Netanyahu, according to Mr. Blinken, had a productive meeting with the Secretary of State today about those bridging proposals. It's now up to Hamas, of course, led by a new hardline leader, Yahya Sinwar, who's based in Gaza. He's been accused by the Israelis of not really wanting to pursue a peace deal, and he say the Israelis would be much more interested in a much bigger, wider regional conflict. But there are those on the Israeli hard-right members of Mr. Netanyahu's government who also don't think that now is quite the time for peace, because they believe that the ultimate military victory against Hamas has not yet been achieved. So it's against this backdrop that Mr. Blinken has to now persuade Hamas to accept the bridging proposals. And the key sticking points are what sort of Israeli military presence will remain in Gaza in the event of a ceasefire, and what rights would Gazan citizens have to return to their home areas unfettered by the Israeli military, again in the event of a ceasefire. Also some discussion about which Palestinian prisoners would be released in exchange for the Israeli hostages. So some big sticking points remain, but Mr. Blinken clearly feels it's worth his while now moving on to Egypt and then to Qatar, and then the talks would resume at the end of this week, hopefully in Cairo. But there's still, I think, a long way to go before that ceasefire is achieved and the hostages are released. But the key thing for the Americans, I know, is to try and avoid a much bigger regional conflict.
Well, and Weira, I have to drill down, because over the weekend we saw attacks on both sides. How does that do anything to get a ceasefire agreement on the table in that sort of environment and backdrop, as you reference?
Indeed, there's no sense here that things are quietening down in anticipation of peace talks. Over the weekend, there were strikes, there were attacks by Israeli forces inside southern Lebanon. Israel quite happy to publicise that against what it said were Hezbollah military dumps and against Hezbollah leaders. Hezbollah responded with a volley of about 50 missiles into Israel, either intercepted or falling in open ground. Of course, Hezbollah has a much bigger military capability than Hamas ever did, and the prospect is, the fear is that either Hezbollah or Iran could decide it's not happy with the peace process, and they could attack Israel either directly or indirectly. Also, the Israeli Air Force continues to strike Hamas positions in Gaza. Many civilians reportedly killed in Gaza over the weekend, but Israel said it succeeded in blowing up and destroying a tunnel in which there were several munitions and rockets. So the fighting continues. Civilians continue to die on both sides. Militants are continue to be targeted by Israel. But the hope is, say the optimists, that the peace deal may be achievable. There are some pragmatists and perhaps some doubters in Israel and in the Palestinian territories who are sceptical that a peace deal may be able to be achieved.
BBC News correspondent Weera Davies, thank you so much for joining us on the stream today. When we come back, we're going to be watching epic flooding in the state of Connecticut. CBS News 24/7, streaming coast to coast and worldwide. Back after the break. All right, jumping the map now to Connecticut. Heavy rain bringing dangerous flooding to many parts of that state. So many people there bracing for more of the same. You see right there the rushing waters. That storm prompted a flash flood emergency, and sadly, 2 people were swept away. Listen to one official at that particular devastating scene.
This is a tragic and devastating day for Oxford. We have this morning recovered 2 bodies in Little River. They were both women, and they're, as I understand it, they're both Oxford residents. You know, I don't think our town is used to flash floods, and you know, a lot of people did the absolute wrong thing, which was try to drive through without knowing what was on the other side. But our prayers and thoughts go out to the families.
So you want to see the power of water like he was just talking about. CBS News national correspondent Nikki Batiste is live in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. And we can see right there the water just has the power to wipe out much.
Yes, Reed, I'm actually standing in the yard of a family. The house is here. We'll pan over in a second. But what you're looking at is what was their driveway. What happened is a gush of water and debris came flying down this road there towards the bottom. There's a very small drain that essentially was overwhelmed. So they started having water gushing, and it literally looked like a waterfall all the way into their home. I'm going to walk over here a little bit. Their car was actually moved about 5 to 10 feet by the water. Kim, the homeowner, told me they were inside watching it happen. She said, frankly, afraid for their lives. Luckily, they're okay. Their house is still standing. They have several feet of water inside. And the other piece that she told me that really gives a sense of how powerful this was and how lucky they are to be alive and that their house is still standing is that their mailbox, which was right there, is now all the way behind their house. I asked him, I said, do you have flood insurance? This isn't an area where you would typically expect this level of flooding. She said, we don't. And she said, most people around here don't have flood insurance. She said she just got off the phone with her insurance company, and they basically told her they're out of luck. Reed?
Wow. Nikki Batiste, thank you so much. Water powerful enough to pick up a car and let it float for several feet. Be safe there for us, and best thoughts to everybody affected. All right, let's bring in Zoe Mintz, who's been watching this from a meteorological standpoint.
And this is a once in a 10, 20 year kind of flood. In Connecticut, they have about a 0.1% chance of seeing this kind of rain in any given year. 0.1%. That is an extremely low number, and it's the reason that not a lot of people have that flood insurance. Unfortunately, it created lots of flooded roadways. It's likely going to take another 24 hours for the drainage system to be able to handle all of the rain that fell. And you might be wondering, was it from Ernesto? The answer is actually no. Ernesto is swirling across the East Coast, but it's not impacting them nearly as much as a stationary front that is just set up along the east coast of the United States. And it's that stationary front that brought significant levels of rainfall. In fact, over 15 inches of rain in the past 72 hours. So let's take a closer look at some of those numbers, because it was a pretty impressive past 24 hours, because just in 24 hours, like I said, 72 hours, we picked up 15 inches, and just 24 hours, we picked up over 8 inches in some locations. Connecticut did see that emergency situation. There are other locations in New York City and New York that also saw emergency flooding situations because of how much fell. Again, this is not normal for this part of the United States. They're continuing to see that chance for excessive flooding throughout this afternoon as well. They're at a level 2 out of 5. That slight risk continues for those areas in yellow. The reason that there are flood warnings currently ongoing, those places in Connecticut and down towards New York that are still dealing with all of the rain on the ground, that rain that just has nowhere to go because the soil is so saturated. Not just rain, but we're also going to be dealing with a little bit of winds, about a 5% chance of winds gusting upwards of 45 miles an hour as that secondary round of reinforcing rain heads your way. Expect about 2 inches of additional rainfall, not nearly as heavy as what we have seen, but either way, it's going to take them at least a day to clean up from all of the rain that they've seen over the past couple of days behind us. Reed, back to you.
All right, thank you so much. From changes in the weather to changes in the song of former and disgraced Congressman George Santos. For so many weeks and months, he said, I didn't do it, not guilty. Well, guess what? We are expecting a guilty plea in his case. CBS News 24/7 back after the break. News anyone who's ever watched a television talk show to hear today. One of the genre's earliest pioneers, Phil Donahue, has passed away following a long illness. His wife of 44 years, actor and St. Jude Cancer Hospital champion Marlo Thomas, was at his side. Donahue launched the Phil Donahue Show in 1967. He was 88 years old. Let's go to Chicago and live video to our monitors from the Democratic National Convention. President Joe Biden will headline tonight with the theme, For the People. That speech comes timed with House Republicans releasing their impeachment inquiry into President Biden. The allegations, abuse of power and obstruction of justice in the financial dealings of his son Hunter Biden and family associates. Well, as for what happens next, pretty unclear right now. So Biden's no longer running for re-election. Let's jump the map to New York and a big and unexpected headline we're going to talk about right now. Disgraced former Congressman George Santos changing his tune. We expect he will soon plead guilty in federal court. This is in about an hour or so. Kind of an about-face also, as for months, Santos has said he is innocent of dozens of fraud charges and accusations of stealing donors' identities to turn around and then charge thousands of dollars to their credit cards. Look at this video out of Alabama right now. People running from powerful wind gusts, holding their children in their arms. Winds blowing that inflatable slide into the air. This was during a party in Hillsborough, which is about 30 miles outside of Macon. That slide airborne. Parents literally had only seconds to act. Zoe, not only wind, but we're watching heat in our nation.
Yeah, I mean, the reason for all the severe weather in the summertime is because of the heat. Severe thunderstorms need heat to build, and we're seeing quite a lot of it all across the country. So let's take a look at some of the heat indices and excessive heat warnings that we are currently under, because Texas has a bullseye over them. The areas in orange, those are heat advisories. The areas in pink, those are excessive heat warnings, where we are likely going to be seeing about 13 million Americans under some sort of excessive heat warning, and likely going to be seeing over 3 dozen records broken. Texas, though, is going to be the big winners or the big losers when it comes to the heat. Temperatures well above 100, 106 in Dallas, potentially getting up to 107 in Austin, where the heat is going to be the biggest issue through the rest of the week ahead of us. So let's take a look at our heat-related illness map, because that is, again, going to be an issue as we step out over the next couple of days. Today's heat-related illness map definitely going to be situated in central Texas. We're going to continue to see the risk for heat-related illness continuing all the way through Tuesday, through Wednesday, even through Thursday as well, before a decline in our temperatures arrives late this week. But either way, the heat is on, so make sure you practice heat safety for the next couple of days. Reed, back to you.
Warning heated. Thank you so much. So how is this for a headline? Ferris wheel on fire. Look at the top of that Ferris wheel there. Our video monitors bringing us this video from a music festival in Germany. More than 20 injured Saturday when 2 of those carriages caught fire. So far, police aren't saying what started this, but look at that, a harrowing situation, and need to rescue people off of that Ferris wheel. All right, in Italy, a yacht goes down, and rescuers are right now in the water looking for 6 people, including reportedly 2 Americans missing at this very hour. 22 people on board when high winds, possibly from a tornado, just hit out of nowhere. We can tell you right now, 1 person is confirmed dead, but the death toll could rise in the hours ahead. When we come back, CBS News 24/7 coming to talk about domestic issues, going live once again in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention, a big day for the startup of Democrats' day to make their case to voters. Back in a minute. This is what we do on the stream. When we see it, you see it. And this is a live picture right now. Joint Base Andrews. Recognize that very big and very prominent plane? It is about to carry President Joe Biden to Chicago for the Democratic National Convention. In just a moment, the president will step on board, and within 45 minutes to an hour, he will be in Chicago, wheels down on the ground, to go and deliver his message to the American people. Now, this was supposed to be Joe Biden accepting that nomination to be the president, or the nominee for president for the Democratic Party. But things changed, and with that change comes a change in plans. The president will now be there on stage recommending that delegates and voters give the green light to the person who is now his vice president, Kamala Harris. Before he does that, though, he's going to deliver a wide and sweeping speech showcasing the accomplishments of his administration, but also putting the focus back on you, the people of the United States. Listen.
Tonight's theme, For the People, will showcase Kamala Harris's commitment to fighting for everyday Americans, because at its core, the Harris-Walz ticket is a ticket for the people. And we'll also be honoring, of course, President Joe Biden. We would not be here without him. His historic record of accomplishment with Vice President Harris by his side is unmatched by any presidential administration in modern history, and it's going to be our honor to spotlight and showcase the the accomplishments of the Biden-Harris administration, as well as the bold vision for the future that Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, and Democrats up and down the ticket will be fighting for this November.
Another thing we do live on the stream is stay live. Fresh from a birthday over the weekend, let's bring in CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry. He is live at the DNC. I see you're among the people, Skylar. What's the mood there? As we know, President Joe Biden will soon begin his flight there to Chicago.
Hey, Reed, good to see you as always. Well, they call this the Windy City, and of course, what a whirlwind this past month has been in terms of the Democratic ticket. Obviously, as you pointed out, with President Biden announcing that he was going to step aside and endorse his vice president, Kamala Harris. And that is similar to what we are expecting here in terms of just the energy around this place. We are in what is referred to as Dem-palooza. It's an expo, if you will, of many Democrats, delegates, and those who are in support of the Democratic ticket here, spreading the joy and talking about certain issues that they feel are most important to them. We've seen signs up talking about ways to improve the economy, faith-based organizations that are encouraging Democratic voters to get out there and make their voices heard. All sorts of people really in Chicago taking this weekend for what it is. But if we're looking ahead to what we can expect for President Biden tonight during his remarks, obviously, as you pointed out, talking about the accomplishments that he's been able to check off, he and his administration over the course of the last 3.5 years or so. And that includes getting the country out of the pandemic, but also talking about ways that he's helped the economy improve, talking about ways that he's helped to reduce prescription drug prices and other areas on the international front as well, while also passing the baton, if you will, to the vice president with his full endorsement. And I think behind the scenes leading up to the president's announcement, there was concerns that there was some infighting among Democrats talking about, should the president step aside? Should he stay in the race? But when you look at certain polling, especially in the days before his announcement, you saw that he was trailing significantly behind former President Trump by at least 5 points during the time that he stepped out. In comparison, when you look at just recent CBS News polling that shows how Vice President Harris is faring against the former president, and she has a 3-point advantage within the margin, so to speak. But you see the momentum shift, Reed, right? And I think that is something that you can certainly feel when you talk to the people here in Chicago.
So, Skylar, stay with me, and I'm glad you brought up those polls, because we want to show our viewers a new CBS poll that speaks to some gaps in understanding between Harris and Trump and just how well people know the two. So look at this. 64% of voters say they know what Harris stands for, but 22% ahead of Harris at 86%. So people who say they know what Trump stands for, very vocal, but really tonight really positions Kamala Harris to sort of close that gap, no?
No, you're right about that, and not just tonight, but throughout this week. I think many people, if they know of the vice president, it was during her time when she ran for president in 2020. Now, at least according to some of the delegates that we've already spoken with, this week will really give them the Harris-Walz ticket an opportunity to sort of reintroduce her to the world, and not only who she is as a person, but also her policies, where she stands on everything from immigration to the economy. And I think we'll see and hear notes of that throughout the week this week, right, from the president and First Lady Jill Biden, among other members of Congress and other prominent speakers that will talk here tonight, former President Barack Obama as well tomorrow. But then we will continue to hear others really sort of lean into not only what they want to accomplish, but how that juxtaposes, if you will, between them and former President Trump and his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance. And so I think that 36%, according to that poll, that has still said that they still aren't sure exactly what the vice president stands for, they will have an opportunity to learn a bit more about that in the days ahead.
Then we would watch the polls for a bump, because we typically see, after whether it's the RNC or the DNC, a bump for the candidate. Skylar Henry live at Dempalooza, better known as the DNC. Thank you so much. Taking it back now to Philadelphia, where Senator J.D. Vance just spoke at a medical waste management company. So we want to let you listen to former President Donald Trump's running mate. He's attacking Vice President Kamala Harris on her economic and energy policies. Listen.
We have a country that is being failed by its present leadership. And don't let anybody gaslight you here, because Kamala Harris is running around the country and saying that on day one, she wants to bring the cost of goods and the cost of housing under control. She says that on day one, she wants to make groceries and homes more affordable for American citizens. Well, Kamala Harris, where have you been? Because you've been vice president for about 1,300 days. Day one was 3.5 years ago. You should have been doing your job then and not promising to do it now. Let's just take stock of the economic record of Kamala Harris. Electricity is up 30%. Food, that's right, food is up more than 20%. Gasoline is up 50%. And this is all because of the policies of Kamala Harris. This is the person who's promising that she's going to fix the very problems that she has been creating for 1,300 days. And now she wants the American people to give her a promotion. My friends, I think it's time for the American people to say to Kamala Harris, you are fired. We want Donald J. Trump.
All right, meantime, former President Donald Trump also on the battleground blitz in Pennsylvania. CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns live from York, Pennsylvania, where now voters will hear from Donald Trump today. Caitlin, Donald Trump has a lot to say to try to steal the headlines away from night one of the DNC.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Reed. Donald Trump has been in a position over the past couple of weeks that he hasn't really been in before, and that is out of the headlines, really. And so this is an effort for the campaign to speak to the economic message and other messages they want to put forward this week, and also to try to kind of cut into Kamala Harris and the Democratic National Committee happening in Chicago. We're here in Pennsylvania, which is pretty much the center of the political universe right now. This is a must-win state, really, for both campaigns. Donald Trump's coming here for the 10th time since announcing his campaign so far. So this is a state that is really going to help determine who wins this thing. He's supposed to focus his remarks on the economy today. We're at a manufacturing plant, as you can see from the setup behind me. This is going to be kind of a small venue, a small address, not a big rally, but really trying to focus on economic policy, his campaign says. And I note that because we know that over the past several days, the former president has gone off message. He's veered off script. He's made personal attacks against Kamala Harris, questioned her looks, has questioned her intelligence. So as much as the campaign wants this candidate to focus on the economy, the border areas where he is leading, according to our recent CBS News polling, he does have a tendency to go off script, and that is part of this as well.
And we've heard reports that Kamala Harris's camp says, let him talk. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much for that on the stream. All right, when we come back, we're going to give another look at epic flooding in Connecticut and communities stepping forward to help one another Also, we have some news that this storm and the flooding that's come of it is now deadly. We're back after the break. News anyone who's ever watched a television talk show will want to hear about. One of the genre's earliest pioneers, Phil Donahue, has passed away following a long illness. This is him getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom not long ago. His wife of 44 years, actor and St. Jude Cancer Hospital champion Marlo Thomas, was at his side. Donahue launched The Phil Donahue Show back in 1967, changed television forever. Phil Donahue was 88 years old. Let's go to Chicago and live video to our monitors from the Democratic National Convention. President Joe Biden will headline tonight with the theme, For the People. By the way, that speech comes timed with House Republicans releasing their impeachment inquiry into President Biden. The allegations, abuse of power and obstruction of justice in the financial dealings of his son Hunter Biden and family associates. So as to what happens next, that is unclear with Biden no longer running for re-election. All right, our video monitor's taking us now to Oxford, Connecticut, where storms have caused massive amounts of flooding. Moments ago, authorities announced they recovered the bodies of 2 women who were swept away by floodwaters. And the rain continues there. Flash flood warnings are still in effect for many parts of the state as that rain falls. It's so frustrating, I'm sure, Zoe, to have so much water on the ground and then have it coming from the sky as well.
Oh, it's so scary, and especially because this is not the part of the country that normally gets this much rain. Connecticut has about a 0.1% chance of seeing this kind of flooding event in any given year. 0.1%. So they are not prepared for this, and a lot of people, unfortunately, don't have any sort of flooding insurance. Let's take a closer look, though, at what caused this, because you might think, oh my goodness, it was Ernesto, because Ernesto brought a lot of coastal conditions. It really picked up the ocean currents and it created some coastal erosion, but Ernesto is actually already offshore. It's a stationary front that's just been sitting over the east coast of the United States, and it is going to continue to impact us over the next 24 hours as well. So let's take a closer look at what we can expect over the next 24 hours, because it is going to be slightly more impactful, or slightly less impactful, I should say, than the past 24 hours, because we saw a lot of rain. 24 hours, we picked up over 8 inches in parts of Connecticut and New York. 8 inches is crazy. 15 inches over the past 72 hours. Luckily, though, over the next 24 hours, it isn't going to be nearly as much, even though there is still that excessive rainfall outlook that is in effect a slight risk, number 2 out of 5 on our severe weather scale. An additional 2 inches of rain is possible, but the issue is they already have completely saturated soil. So you do see a flood warning that is currently in effect because the river levels are just so high, and it's going to take hours for all of this water to find some sort of drainage route to exit to. Not only dealing with some water, but also dealing with a little bit of wind action, about a 5% risk of seeing some damaging wind gusts as we step out tonight. And it is that stationary front, that reinforcing round of rain. Again, an additional 2 inches is possible throughout this afternoon, where we are going to keep our eyes on those flooding threats across the Northeast. Luckily, though, it's going to get a lot drier over the next 24 to 48 hours. So there is positive news there. Hopefully the water has some drainage areas to get into and finally not see any of that saturated soil.
That's right. We'll take any positive news we can get. Thank you so much, Zoe. All right, so it is a big day in these United States with the DNC beginning in Chicago. We do have this picture right now. We are waiting to see President Joe Biden pull up in that black SUV and go up those stairs to get onto Air Force One to fly to Chicago, where he will be announced tonight at the DNC by his daughter, Ashley Biden. Many, many speakers and a big night.